And I'd like to introduce Tammy, who is here. Tammy is here to talk a little bit about her work in the area of inquiry and inquiry cycles and some of her thinking as we've been kind of living and working remotely. I have the pleasure of knowing Tammy through some of my work with ASCD. Tammy is and always will be a New Yorker. She taught for the New York City Department of Education and was also providing coaching support. In that regard, was a really, really awesome member of the staff of the DOE, and now is located in Singapore, where she's done work working with a number of international schools in that country. She also serves as an educational coach and will soon, Tammy, we don't know when, but soon will be coming back to the United States, right? You know, that's the plan, though on the West Coast. You know, we hope that one day she'll join us back on the East Coast again, because we definitely would like to have her back in our educational system. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Tammy, and I'm going to give you hosting rights so you can continue to say hello, add anything else into your intro, and then we look forward to learning from you.
Thank you very much, Fred. Yes, New Yorker at heart for sure, but we'll see how the West Coast goes for a little while. Welcome everybody to this session. I'm just gonna share my screen now just so that we can, I changed the title a little bit, so I just want to talk a little about that. But in the meantime, if you could go onto your little cell, and because there's not many faces here, but those of you who are on, if you can just type in, if you can rename yourself with those three little dots and just put your role beside your name and maybe where you are, just so I have that. And then I'm going to share my screen while you do that. Okay. So I already know that Lorraine is here, and I don't have too many faces still, sadly, but if you feel brave and you want to join us with your face soon, that would be great. Oh, my screen doesn't want to. Can you see the whole screen okay? Yeah, okay, all right. Now, I slightly changed the workshop name to add this kind of subtitle here, a hybrid of like old-fashioned and simple tech-based inquiry experiences, because we are in that online space right now. But at the same time, inquiry doesn't have to be that, even though people are learning from home. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As Fred said, my name is Tammy Musiowsky-Borneman. My Twitter handle is there, and we can use the hashtag PL on the go if you so wish to share your learning while we're here or later on. Oh, there we go. So I just want to get a sense of who is here. So thank you for renaming yourself if you're on the screen. And also, if we could just use the chat box, I just kind of wanted to know in terms of your experience with inquiry learning or teaching and learning. So in the chat box, if you could just put it's new to you, if you're novice, intermediate, or expertise. And I've lost the chat box. Where is it? Can you see it, Fred? Can you let me know?
I can, and I can
okay.
I can monitor it for you.
Okay, thanks, because now I have all these windows happening, and I'm sorry for that.
And as people are typing in so far, Tammy, you're getting some novice and some intermediate.
Okay, cool. Good. Now, I'm not sure what happened exactly to my view, but I've switched the type of view it is. So there you go. You'll see it that way.
Yeah, we can still see it, Tim.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've got some novices and intermediates. That's awesome.
Yep.
So just a little bit about my background in inquiry. I would consider myself kind of intermediate-ish too. So when I used to teach in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, that's where I'm originally from, we kind of had project-based curriculum that we used to teach with at the school that I was at and many of the schools that I taught at. And then I transitioned to New York, and I had to do a bit of a shift with the way I was teaching, but still held the same pedagogical beliefs about how kids learn and what kind of teaching and learning I wanted to participate in. So my co-teacher and I was just really lucky to have two really great co-teachers who we were very much on the same page with how we wanted things to look in the classroom. So we did our best to kind of modify what we had into as much inquiry as we could for our students. And then I moved to Singapore and moved into an IB school. So the PYP program is what I've been teaching the last few years. And that is all inquiry based. So everything, it's the whole program from the planning and collaboration and all of that. So it's been really exciting to be back in that setting full on, because I learned a lot from my peers and a lot from the students along the way, which is, I think, probably the most fun part of that. So to start off, we're going to just talk a little bit about before what inquiry learning is, what it is not, because there is a lot of misconceptions around that. So I'm missing a slide there. Anyway, that's all right. So some misconceptions that people tend to have about inquiry teaching and learning is that it's really unstructured. It's kind of a free-for-all. Kids are just noisy and the room is chaotic. That inquiry is just an activity time where kids will go and do their inquiry thing for now, but then we'll get back to regularly scheduled program. There's also the misconception that it's easy to do and it's easy to plan because you just wing it, and that maybe inquiry is just for everyone because it is just free and open. But those are some of the things that kind of have to be kiboshed, put off to the side, because inquiry teaching and learning is basically the opposite of all of those misconceptions. So now if we take a look at what inquiry is, Joe Fahey is an inquiry-based teaching and learning expert, I'll say a true expert among many other people. And a quote that I picked out from one of the books that she had written about inquiry-based learning for the IB programs was that inquiry it's a process initiated by the student or the teacher that moves the students from their current level of understanding to a new and deeper level of understanding. And so within that, we have it's a pedagogical belief that we hold as teachers that inquiry-based learning is this process, and it's a cycle that we go through, just like our life learning. So we will, if you think about the day and this past week, this entire few months that we've been in this pandemic, we've been going through a lot of inquiries about ourselves, about our daily lives, about what do we do now. So we've been learning a lot, and we've had to ask ourselves a lot of questions. We've had to ask each other a lot of questions. Your kids have been asking you questions, your students. So everybody right now has been in this huge inquiry-based learning process. And so if we take that belief that that's how kids should learn in school, it really does replicate life, because life is a big cycle of learning. So with just having said that, we would want to ask ourselves, well, then why would we want to use this kind of approach? And so I kind of already answered that, but it's also because within this cycle of learning, we are developing students' skills, competencies, and dispositions that are transferable to life. So yes, we are teaching content. Ideally in inquiry-based learning, you're going to be teaching through those overarching concepts. And then you break those apart and you can build out your inquiry cycles, because there's many going on, so that students can develop their competencies through the questions they ask, the engagements that you plan, and their interactions with each other. I forgot to mention, if you do have any questions along the way, just feel free to raise the hand thing in the chat, or just type them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them as we go. So one of the bigger questions then becomes, well, how is it that we go about teaching through inquiry? So as I mentioned, inquiry-based teaching and learning is an entire approach. So it's not just planning. That's just one of the many pieces of the entire puzzle. But planning is a huge piece of that puzzle, because when we're planning, we're doing that collaboratively with our teams, either horizontally or vertically. And we're using the concepts within our benchmarks or standards to help us drive that plan. So when I use the word plan, it's rigid in a sense, because we do have that same structure using the standards, but it's open because it's driven by the student interests, what skills they attain, how we want to attain them, but also the direction that they end up taking them in throughout their inquiries. So the planning can be a bit stressful, because it is a lot of deep thinking work, even though sometimes in your plan book it doesn't look like a lot of planning, but there's a lot of conversation around all of the ways in which you want your kids to inquire into something. A second piece of that puzzle are some levels of inquiry. So we need to understand that there are different levels at which kids are going to be involved into inquiry activities. And so this sketch note is done by Trevor McKenzie, who is, I would consider him also an expert in inquiry-based teaching and learning. And he's also a fellow Canadian, which is kind of awesome. So he drew this based on something that he had learned. And so if you see on the left side, kind of in the shallow end of the pool, we have a more structured inquiry approach, which is teacher-led, basically. So the teacher is giving the direction to the kids, and then they do the inquiry together. A little deeper into the pool, we have a controlled inquiry. And that is going to be when the teacher chooses whatever the inquiry is, but there's a little bit of freedom in which the kids might be able to choose a resource or an idea to follow along. Then we get a little deeper and we have a guided inquiry. So this is where the teacher is going to choose the questions or topics, and the students then take control of the designing of a product or solution or whatever it is they're learning about. And then over in the deep end, we've got that free and open inquiry, which is where it's kind of scary for us as teachers to go to that deep in the pool, but it can happen. It doesn't have to happen with all students at one time. It just might be one or two students at any point in time. But it depends on teacher comfort, but also how well students can use those skills for managing themselves within their inquiries as well. And then a third piece of the puzzle, which we're going to look a little bit more deeply into today, is we're using an inquiry cycle as a guide. So this cycle is Kath Murdoch's inquiry cycle, which is one of many that are out there. This one in particular is adopted by many schools, and this is the one that I've used in both of the schools that I've taught here in Singapore. So it's a step, and the word step is very loose because the lines between each step can be blurred, because at any given point, students are going to be moving between stages. They might jump across the cycle, go back and forth. So there might be an entire class inquiry going on at one time, and then many student inquiries. And there could be just happening throughout the day at any time. They could be for the whole unit or just one lesson period. It just really depends on what's happening and what the content is. So that's where we're going to focus our attention today. All right. Just a heads up, we might be able to do some breakouts if we have some people that would like to use the breakout. The other option is to do that just using the chat, just people dropping in their ideas. So this is just the heads up that there will be 2 of those. The first one will be after the first 3 steps in the cycle, and then the second will be at the end of those. Any questions so far?
Nothing in the chat for now, Tim.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so we'll look at the first step in Kath Murdoch's inquiry cycle, which we would call tuning in. At each step in the cycle, there are a number of associated questions for which you can pose to students and ask them throughout the cycle. Tuning in, I find, takes quite a bit of time because we really have to figure out what students are thinking about. So we're tuning into what students are thinking about an idea that we're presenting, not necessarily what the content is. So we want to know, the examples coming up are about organizational systems. So we want to know what kind of information do students already have about a particular system. So we might just ask them, it's kind of like a KWL, like what do you already know? How do you know that? What do you think you might wonder about this? And how do you feel? So there are some of those emotive questions included in each cycle. So we'll just take a look at a couple of examples for how you might support students in tuning in. So first we would have a chalk talk. I use this quite a lot in the beginning of my units. These are a couple of my students from a couple of years ago. And what a chalk talk is a visible thinking routine. And there's a number of different ways that you can use it. One of the ways that I would use it would be to put either a word or a new central idea or a big understanding on a sheet of paper, chart paper, depending on how many kids were going to work together. And they would just explore that statement or word. So they would the chalk talk can either be silent or it can be not silent. But the point is they're just looking at words that they might know or know within a word and just write what they are thinking. So they can use pictures or words or statements. They can add on to each other's words. And then sometimes you can do a rotation where they will add on to each other's thinking. But at the end of the time, we would come together and look at everyone's understandings and see where the commonalities were and where maybe some misconceptions were as well. So this is an easy thing to do in the classroom, obviously. You can do this also online using just like a Google Keep Post-it thing. So I just have snapshotted what the central idea was, which was exchange systems help our communities. And then you can just share that little Post-it to your students through their school emails, or they can simply just write their thinking on a Post-it and show it to you, send a picture to you. So it's easy to adapt this kind of visible thinking routine. Another way to tune into student thinking is through a Zoom in, which is another thinking routine. This can be done digitally or on paper. So this is another set of my students from, it was the same class, but I had a big transition that year. That's why I'm kind of confused about the students. But so a Zoom in starts with, you can either do this on paper. So I did one myself first. So I had a picture and it was covered up with like puzzle pieces that I cut apart. And I just took off small pieces at a time, and they had to try to guess what the picture was based on what our main idea was. So you can do that on a Google slide as well easily. So if you're doing that in your online classroom, you can do that. Then the kids loved it, so they wanted to make their own. So then this is a couple of my students creating the cover sheet on the left, and then in the middle he was trying to piece his own pieces back together. And then the final piece was they were going to share it with their peers to see if they could guess what the picture was underneath. So that was another interesting way, and you can do this any level, of course, for any content, but it was just kind of a fun way for them to like see where their thinking was at the start of a unit. So then we once they kind of saw that little glimmer of a picture and then they started to see the whole picture, it helped me understand what they kind of already knew about it. And finally, sorry, I'm going to have to fly through Fred. Okay, but tuning in is a really fun part of a unit because there's just so much you can do with it. So a third activity that I really like to do is the object-based inquiry. And so you can see here, you would just choose an object. And again, you can do this in the classroom. Your kids can bring things from home, and you might want to connect it to their home cultures, because maybe kids in their classroom aren't from the same places or what have you, and they can do some inquiries about each other's cultures. You can also do this online as well by just posting a picture, or kids can take turns putting up a picture. And then we would pose questions based on our IB concepts that we chose. So on the left, we had a melon baller, which we figured no one would know what it was. And so we were asking questions like, what do you think this is for? How could it be changed? And how can you make connections to something else? And then you can see just some of the things that came out when the kids were tuning into what this might be and what it was used for. And then we gave us the idea of kind of what their background was in that thinking. So that's for first step, tuning in. Then when we move to the second step in the cycle, we've got finding out. So this is where students are really going to be thinking about what do they want to know more about, what resources do they need, who are they going to ask, how do they feel about having to do this research. So this is starting to be a more independent piece of the puzzle if the kids have that experience. So this might be guided for some, this might be less structured, or I just forgot the next step in it. But anyways, there's lots of different levels of inquiry that can happen here. So you can't go wrong with a book immersion to help them do their research. Kids love looking through books at diagrams, reading labels. So anytime we had a unit start, we always had our basket of books for kids to look at. And again, this is adaptable to online as well, because I know lots of schools have platforms like Epic or even Storyline online where there's stories read to kids. There's lots of databases to have kids get immersed in books related to whatever the concept is. So that's a pretty easy one. And then another piece of the puzzle is to find out more is you can set up and conduct interviews. So this is my class, same class, we were finding out about artifacts. And so I provided the kids, this was early in the year, so I provided them with this questioning chart to help them come up with some questions for our interviewee, who happened to be my friend Lisa, that Fred knows as well. They were asking her about her archaeological dig in Russia, for which she found human bones. So she was talking about that, and the kids came up with some really good questions, just having this scaffold for them to create some questions. It wasn't this one, but it was something similar. So that lets them dig in a little bit and ask some questions about whatever their topic might be that they're trying to find out their research for. We're almost to the break. Third step would be the sorting out, which I really enjoy because I am love organizing and sorting things out. And so these are the kinds of questions that you would ask your students or present to them during this part of the cycle. And that's just, how are you going to sort out the information you came up with? How does it connect to what you already know? What categories can you make? And then this is where you're going to probably see some shifts in thinking. So students are going to be getting to that point where they're like, oh, I thought this, but I have learned this now. So that's kind of a fun part of the process, and becomes that, again, another more independent piece. So a lot of different layers in the structure of how the inquiries can look. And so on the left, students were sorting out pictures for a food web. That was done collaboratively later in the year. I didn't really have to provide them much guidance besides, like, you're going to put together your food web, you guys figure out what makes best sense for that. And then they shared with the class how they sorted it out. The middle picture is the start of a unit at the very start of the year. So we were discussing relationships and how people connect together and communicate. And so I gave them that structure, and they had to sort out the pictures, find ones that they figured fit in categories. And then on the right side here, my little buddy Peter, we were outside in the garden one day reading, and he just started collecting some rocks, and he was sorting them in his own way. Not really related to anything that we were doing, but he just loved being outside. It was nice to be outside. And then he was just telling me about his thought process about how he was sorting them, which, if that's something he was interested in, I was going to find a way to bring that into the classroom, because that was what he was loving to do. So he got to bring some of those rocks in, talk to the kids about it. So even though it was not related to our content, I still went with it because I knew that it was important to him. So again, these you can do, as you see, easily in a classroom for any level, any concept, any class. And online, you can do sorting in lots of different ways. There's so many platforms where you can put pictures on and kids can sort them out. Google Classroom, or Google, has all sorts of things, the drawings and stuff like that. One last one before we have a quick chat break is the Y chart for categorizing ideas around a concept, and just categorizing them by what you think it sounds like, what it looks like, and what it feels like. So this can be anything from what do I think my classroom community should be, or it can be anything related to history, math, anything. So it's just a nice open-ended kind of categorizing activity that can, again, be done in a classroom. Kids can do it at home. They can do it online. It's really easy to adapt. So we'll have a breakout here. I know it's been a lot and I went way over time like I thought I was going to, but let's take a couple of minutes. Fred, do we have enough people to have some chat? So you can talk about, just introduce yourself, and maybe talk about one of the steps in the cycle that you have identified in your classroom, or one of the strategies you think that you would be able to implement in your classroom, or shift what you're already doing to make it more of a piece of the inquiry cycle. And we'll come back in a couple of minutes.
Great. So I am going to break up our room. So let's see, we're going to do that. And I think what I'll be able to do, let me just look. I think I will be able to have everybody I think we can get like 3 people in a room. And I think, Tammy, it may assign you to a room too, but you can kind of hop in and out as you see fit, right? So Tam, in fact, it's going to assign you to a room, but you can leave the room. And then if you pop back in here, the people in that room, there'll still be enough people in that room for them to chat.
Okay. Yeah.
And then if you pop into the main room, you can then let me know when you want to call everybody back. All right?
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to send people to rooms now. You got it. So you should have an invite to head to a room now. Hey, Tam. You're muted as you come in.
Yeah, I was talking to Mary, but then her phone must have dropped off or something. But that's okay.
Yeah. So what I did was so there were a couple people in our main room who must have like stepped away, right?
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
they haven't gone to their rooms. So what I did is
Okay.
I moved people who I consolidated the rooms. So now
Okay.
in each of the rooms, there are at least 3 people who are actively on.
Okay, cool.
Okay?
Yeah, no,
So,
yeah, sorry.
no, we're all good. So everybody should have at least 2 other talking partners, and you just let me know when you want to call people back.
Okay, I knew that would happen too. It's so fun to talk about.
Yeah, it's awesome, and it's really I love the strategies you've shared, right? Like I looked at the interview questions and prompts, and I was like, oh, those are awesome, right? And then 2, I like the zoom in also. Like I could think of reasons to use that with adult learners too, and places where I'd incorporate that. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah, that's what Mary said. She's like, it's really helpful to have some examples because now I can just think about how to adapt it into my room. And I'm like, that's the thing with these, like it's adaptable to anything, anytime, any level, any way.
Sure.
You know? So yeah, it's good. Maybe 1 more minute.
Yeah. All right. So let me send a message out that we're going to close the room in a minute.
Yeah, your girls would like to zoom in.
Yeah. Oh, they sure would. In a minute. So let me do that. Broadcast. And now close the rooms. Awesome. So people should be coming back in a minute, and then you'll be able to hop back in and continue the good work.
Cool. Yeah, there's just so much to talk about. It's like, I don't want to forget stuff, but whatever. I'm always going to forget stuff.
And you could do like you could really break the cycles down per session,
Yeah.
So which is awesome also.
Which is something I'm working on, but I'm working on my own version.
All right, so people should be joining us probably. It looks like there's a couple rooms that are still open, but they should be coming back. Yep, right about now.
Cool. Okay, I'll go back to screen share. Or not yet, actually. Does anyone want to just unmute themselves and give a quick share about what you chatted about before we move on? An idea you wanted to use or thought was maybe helpful?
I'll jump in, Tam.
Okay.
One thing that I had shared with Tammy while you were wrapping up your time in your rooms was I really liked, I love the interview question prompts. I thought they were really kind of valuable and great ways to help kids think about ways to access information and how certain words can lead to certain types of responses, right? And I think that's a really important thing for all learners to know. And then I also love the zoom in. I thought, I work primarily with adult learners. And so I thought of a number of situations where using that as kind of a way to focus on key points would be really, really helpful to the educators I work with. So.
Thanks very much, Fred. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes to run through the rest. So, Fred, can you?
I will share. Yeah, I'll share hosting. Right. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Let me do that.
That's okay.
All right. So you are, let's see, you are now good.
Okay. All righty. Okay, so thank you for your discussions. We're going to get into the fourth part of the cycle, which we would call going further. This part of the cycle is that point where kids are starting to reflect on what they're going to do with their learning. So they might need to decide what information they're going to share from their inquiry. What else do they need to find out? Who are they going to present it to? And what kind of connections they made to other pieces of learning. And that could be within their inquiry or outside of it. Hopefully they're starting to see those connections between the different disciplines too throughout inquiries, because it can be fairly open, especially when you're teaching through concepts. So one example that you can use is called tug of war. And again, really easily adaptable for any unit, any grade, whatever. So this thinking strategy is really good to pull out perspective. So if kids need some more information, maybe they're researching, I can't even think of an example right now. Oh, I've got the systems on there. So maybe they're looking at communities and how systems help communities, or maybe they need to find out, well, what are some systems that actually are kind of restrictive to communities? So you can either do this kind of timeline sort of line, or you can adapt it to use Padlet. So in Padlet, they have these timeline bars, and you can just post along it. So if you're in class, you can put a string up and have those kind of polar ends, and then they can stick their Post-its up wherever their opinion fits. And you can do the same on a Padlet. I know it's very small in there, but if you go in there, it's a free login. You'll see all the different templates that they have, and then you can just put whatever your central idea is or your big understanding, and then you can share it and they can type in their ideas there. So that's a good one for perspective. Another one for pushing them further in the cycle is, oops, sorry, went too far. Parts, people, interactions. So this one is really good for them to kind of slow down the thinking when they get to that point when they're making the decisions about what they're going to do with their learning. So they're pulling apart what are the parts of whatever system you're studying. This is good for systemic pieces. Who are the people involved? And then how did those parts and people interact? Or how do the people within that interact? And what happens if one of those things changes? So they're really then looking at a change in circumstance, a change in people. So they really have to break that apart and think about how an entire system can change when one part of it is changed. So that then can shift a perspective too. So that's a really cool one to do. And this I just made in a Google Doc. You can share it with your students and they can type in their ideas, or they can have their own. You can do it on chart paper in the classroom. You can do it with little guys, with drawings, whatever your level is and whatever is going to work for you. Moving into making conclusions. So this next two slides I put together for the making conclusions and taking action because they're really closely related. So when kids are making the conclusions, now this is where you get to spend the time seeing what they've really understood about the concept or your big understanding, And so some strategies that you can use to find that out is, sorry, I just want to skip ahead one. And then I'm going to go back, is just to do some conferencing with your students. So really strategic questioning about, well, what did you find out? How do you feel about that? Is there something else you need to know? What was your shift in thinking? Or you can use that strategy of 9 whys, where you just keep asking the why question until there is no more why to ask. So that really kind of pares things down to kind of find the root of the change in thinking or the learning. And then your final step in the cycle is a big piece, and this is the taking action with what kids have learned. So between the making conclusions and taking action, where kids are deciding, how am I going to move forward with this learning? Where else am I going to apply it? They're also thinking about, this is the reflection piece, where how am I going to use this now to help other people? Or how could I have changed my learning cycle to have been better? Was there a piece that I missed? Would I have tried to learn this maybe differently, using a different resource or asking another person? So this is really that reflective piece of the cycle and the kind of bigger picture. So when we look at bigger picture, we can look at, oops, I keep scrolling on the wrong part. Community circles. So we've probably seen them as just the concentric circles of that kind of center community of home and school. And then your local community is that bigger outset. And then your global community. So how are your kids deciding, well, what are the changes I'm going to make at home or at school? What am I going to teach my family members or my peers based on what I've learned in this cycle? How am I going to take this out to the greater community? Do I want to start volunteering somewhere? Do I want to make a poster for something? That kind of raising awareness for a campaign or sharing of information. And then of course there's global movements and bigger, larger scale advocacy campaigns that kids can participate in from a young age all the way up. So something that you might want to look at if you want to bring more global pieces into your school, you might want to connect your concepts or central ideas or big understandings to some of the sustainable development goals, because there's a ton of activity already built out for those, and there's different campaigns that you can join to help broaden awareness for how kids can have an impact on a greater scale with what they've learned. So that's anywhere from quality education to sanitation to using partnerships to learn. So that's a whole other set of big, long workshops. But I just thought I'd throw that out there for you in case you might have an interest in taking some action with some of those goals and presenting that idea to your students if they're ready to go bigger scale. So 9:49 is pretty good. So that section was much shorter, and I'm glad, because there is one more. We can either do breakout or just a quick reflection in the chat with I used to think and now I think. So you can either use that as a prompt for kind of what you came away with in today's session, or you can continue talking about a strategy that you thought may be useful, or something that you can see coming into play in the classroom. So what do you think, Fred? Breakout or chat?
I'm happy to give breakout time, Tam. We can give people, about 4 or 5 minutes, right?
Okay.
So cool. Lorraine is saying chat, right? She's saying. Yeah. Okay. So was that for the chat box, Lorraine? Is that what you were thinking? Okay. So we broke out. We'll now go to the chat box feature, right? And so if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to say, I used to think, right? And then just note that, and then now I think, right? And so give yourselves 2 or 3 minutes to type into the chat, and then we can you see the chat box now, Tammy, or you can't? It's not up on your screen?
No.
Okay, so I can report it to you, or if you stop sharing, then it'll be easier to see, right?
There we
So
go.
now,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so if you don't
Okay.
mind adding that into the chat box, we'll give you a couple minutes, and then we'll come back and look at what you wrote.
Danielle is asking, can you please share the activities or the cycle or both? I can do that. This is recorded, right? It'll be on the YouTube channel too, right, Fred?
It is, and Tam, I
Okay.
don't know if you'd want to make like or I don't know if you have a a PDF of like the presentation or something you could pop into the chat box so people can access it.
Not to the chat box right now, but I can just make a resource page
Okay.
with the links, because there's different variations for activities too, and I mean they're easily adaptable and all of that. So
And so
yeah,
I'm wondering, you know what? So here's my question, Tam. Would
yeah,
you be open to providing some form of contact in the chat box? So if people want,
yes,
right? Because when we close out the Zoom, because it's not registered, right?
yeah,
People won't be able to get at it. So maybe if they contact you,
yes.
then
There we
you'll
go.
know to send it out to them.
Yeah, sorry, that was on my last slide. But there's my email, info@tmuseed.com. So if you just send me an email to that, and then I'll send you the list of the activities and the inquiry cycle and all of the things related.
Pam, could you do me a favor? Could you, I bet somebody probably private messaged you with like a question. And so when you put it in the box, it probably went as a private message to that person.
Oh, yep, it did.
So like if you recopy it and just select to everyone, then your email will pop into the box and everyone will be able to grab it.
Sure thing. There we go.
Awesome. Okay, awesome.
Okay, there we go. There we are.
Perfect. And that's info at, or is there an I at the start of it?
Oh, dear Lord,
Hold
yes.
on, I got it. I got it. I'm
Okay.
on it.
Sorry, I cut the I off.
All right. So here we go. So here's Tammy's
Yes.
email. Perfect. And so if you want to access any of those resources, you can send an email to her and she can help you with them. And I'm just going to read a couple of these, Tammy. So
Yeah.
Lorraine wrote, I used to think inquiry-based learning was for student learning. And Lorraine wrote, now I think about how I can also use this with the coaching I do for new leaders. So that's awesome.
Awesome. Yes.
And
Very
then
much.
Danielle wrote, I used to think that inquiry-based learning would be difficult since my previous students have had some difficulty self-starting. I now know that through inquiry-based learning, I would still be able to provide assistance. However, it'll be insightful to see what my students can accomplish with some more flexibility. That's great.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good. It does take time too, right? It can be highly structured or not so structured. It just depends on who the student is.
So we're coming up at 5 minutes to the hour, and I'm going to do two things with everybody. First, before we wrap up, I'm going to pop in the chat our PL on the Go placemat for this week. This has all our professional learning on the go sessions for this week. Coming up next is a great session with Danielle Colangelo, who's our coordinator of literacy and teacher center. She's going to be looking at a variety of tools to add to your toolkit to support literacy instruction remotely. And then at 11 to 12 p.m., we've got a great session from Minu Thomas and Katora Proctor, two educators from our region. One of them is from Elmsford, another is from Bronxville. And they'll be talking a little bit about where equity can live when we're operating remotely. So we hope that those sessions and more will work for you. And then the last thing I'm going to do before we thank Tammy and thank you all for your time is I'm going to pop a feedback survey into the chat box too. So And feel free to leave details. And before I say thanks and goodbye, Tammy, I'll turn it over to you for anything final you want to add.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you very much to you, Fred, for hosting this. It was fun to get to chat with other teachers and chat about something that I'm really passionate about and I find to be a lot of fun. And so I'm glad that Lorraine, you made the point about bringing this to your teachers. It's definitely, like I said at the very beginning, it's something that we do throughout our lives anyway. It's our life is just a natural inquiry cycle. So why don't we teach kids that way? So I'm excited to hear how you move forward with your staff um, and try out some of the practices. In that, I grabbed a couple of people's emails that were in the chat, but definitely if you want some more of those protocols and thinking routines, I can send those out to you if you just send me an email. So thank you very much again, Fred. And thank you everyone for your time and attention. And I look forward to hearing how things work out. Maybe I'll be back for another session.
Awesome. Well, that would be great. Tammy, we want to thank you for giving your time. We know, as I mentioned when we started, Tammy is in Singapore, right? So it's basically 12 hours ahead. She's already worked through her Tuesday and is getting ready to wind down her Tuesday evening. So Tammy, thank you for giving time out of your evening to join us and join
Sure.
educators from New York, New Orleans, and other places around the world. And thanks to all of you for joining us for the 9 o'clock hour, and hope to see you in the future for more professional learning on the go. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.